All right, so we up to now have talked about a lot of different things. In this video, I want to talk about color and the flexibility that you have using digital files versus like physical, tangible things when you're scrapbooking. So, you know from like years of doing this that you have like a million types of color paper and there's different textures and different embellishments, and you can have like one particular thing, like say this kind of button here, and there's so many different paper colors. If they made this one button in every color you can think of, like you'd have to have loads of these things. um, Again, there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to digital stuff. So I'm going to crop this uh, red button. I'm going to hit Command 0. I'm going to switch to my magic wand tool, click on the white. I have a tolerance of 50. Again, if your tolerance is really low and you click, it will be very selective of the kind of colors that it picks. It won't pick all the white. If you're too lenient, like if you did 300, then, oh, it has to be below 255. If you're 255 and you click, it's going to select everything. Let's say 150. Let's see what that does. Okay, it selected the white and even some of the red. So this is a little too loose. So like I said, if you want to do a good job, you got to play with these numbers, and eventually you'll get mostly just white. Okay. Um, so here's our background layer. If I wanted to try to delete this white, it won't let me. It wants me to fill it in with something. And the reason why is because this background layer is the only thing there. So it's locked by default. So I'm going to double click on it and just rename it, and now it's unlocked. So now if I hit delete, now I can make the background transparent. So all I'm left with is this button. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. Again, you can crop this down even more if you want to, lessen what you have to work with. And there you go. And you could save this as a Photoshop file and, name this particular type of button. Now the flexibility part comes with those adjustment layers. So let's say that I wanted this in brown. I can click up here on the adjustment layers. I can click hue and saturation, and I can play around with the color of this particular button. So if I wanted to make it brown, I think I would be like in the reds or yellows, orange kind of layer. You can play with saturation too to make something more or less colorful. Of course, if you're going for black and white, you'll just drop all the saturation or just do a black and white filter. Let's just play with this. So it's going to be a mix of playing with the hue and saturation, as well as another adjustment. I'm going to go back to adjustments and click, you can do brightness and contrast. So brown is usually dark, so I'm going to darken the color. I can click back on my hue saturation, and you can kind of cycle through. Now that it's darker, and kind of get something a little better. Take the color out a little more. So I drop the saturation, and you can go back, change things as you need to. So like there's a brown button. So we took the exact same button. So here's that history panel. I can scroll up to the top. I started with all of these buttons. I cropped it to this particular red button, and then now with all these modifications we've created a brown button. So there you go. Now you have a brown button. You can make a blue button or a purple button. And you're not limited to just doing this with objects. So let me close this and show you what I'm talking about. So as you know, there's a million types of paper that you can pick from. So like here's some like zigzag paper. It looks like it's almost like an off purple and white. You can probably do the exact same thing with an adjustment, and you can change the color to be whatever you want. So like if you're going for like green, you can increase the saturation if you want more green, or like a more muted green. I feel like the possibilities are endless. Let's say you wanted a light green. Well, I have a hue saturation, changing this to like white, or changing this to green. I can go back to adjustments, add a brightness contrast layer, and increase the brightness until it's like a lighter green. Let's see, what else could you do? You could probably drop this saturation. So there's more like of a muted color. And you can just keep stacking adjustments as you see fit. If I put in a levels adjustment, let's say I didn't like how dark this color was, I can grab the darks, either here or here, and I can, other way. Maybe I'll just grab the midtones, yeah. And then I can grab and drag and make like a light mint green. So, like I said, you can stack all of these different things, and you can toggle them on and off to see like what they're contributing to the overall picture. Okay, so there is how you can, change the color or something. So when it comes to it, you're more or less looking for different textures and patterns more than you are color. Because like I said, a lot of this stuff is pretty flexible. Now, I saved like this particular example. This is some black and white stripes. If you start off with something that has color in it, like a paint swatch, it's pretty simple, right? You can just adjust the color with an adjustment and change whatever color you want. The problem is when you start with something that doesn't have color. So this black and white stripe, if I put an adjustment on this, well, right now it won't even let me put an adjustment. Let me go to image mode. Yeah, see, it's in grayscale mode. I'm going to change this and go back to, I don't know, RGB. Okay, so now I can put adjustments on this. If I was to try to put a hue saturation layer on here, and I try to change the hue and saturation, there's no color that I'm even starting with. It's all black and white, so I can't really change the color because there is no color. So that's not going to be helpful. Same thing with some of these other things. Like you can probably affect, like, maybe some of the blacks with a levels adjustment. So like this one doesn't do anything. If you had a levels adjustment, then you can make the black more gray or the white more gray, depending on like sliding these different sliders. Well, I guess that doesn't work either. I bet these will though. So if I take the black point and move it more gray, you can have gray. Or if you take the white point and you move it down, you can make more gray. But you're really limited, right? Okay, well, let me show you a workaround for this. If you want to add color to something that doesn't have color, I'm going to grab my magic wand tool and make sure it's on a decent, all the black is the exact same and all the white's the exact same, so the tolerance doesn't have to be very high. I'll just use like 20, and I'm going to click on like black. Okay. You can basically just take a brush, pick a color that you want, like red, increase your brush size, and paint. So you're using the paper as a pattern to create a selection, and then from the selection, then you create the color that you want. And then once you do that, then your possibilities are open again. You can change the hue and saturation just like you would before. Okay? Let's see. Another way to do this, let's say I go back to my black and white. I'm going to use this history panel. go all the way back to the beginning. Of course, I'm going to have to change the image mode again from grayscale to RGB. Okay, another way to do this, let's see, let me actually save that. I was going to tell you something else, but let me use a different paper as an example. This paper is fine. So this paper doesn't have color in it either. It's just white. Of course, if you want to make the paper more white, you can use an adjustment, like a levels adjustment, and take the brights and make them brighter. So there, I'm moving the white closer to where these pixels actually start. You can move the black up if you want darker shadows. And then you can take these midtones and move them accordingly so you get the look that you want. Okay, let's say I want that. How do we add color to something like this? You can't use like the magic wand tool, and you can't like make much of a selection from this. It's not as black and white. Haha, it's funny. What you can do is you can make a new layer on top of everything and literally just color in the whole layer. So let's pick a color. Let's pick, I don't know, orange. I'm going to click OK. Just going to increase my brush size. And, oh, this must also be in a grayscale mode because look, there's no color. I'm going to change that. So I'm painting with orange, but there's no color. That just has to do with the picture settings. So I'm going to go back up to image mode and change it from grayscale to RGB. Let's see, do I want to flatten? Okay, well, it's not going to let me unless I flatten it. That's not helpful. So let me go layer, flatten. I wanted to get rid of what I painted over because then you couldn't see anything. Now it'll let me change it. Image mode, RGB. Okay, now let's add a new layer. Paint in the orange. There we go. So now why would I do this? Why would I paint over the texture? Now you don't see the texture. Well, there's a couple things you can do. First, you can play with the opacity. So if you want, you can just make this layer not as solid, and therefore you'll kind of get some different colors. So that's one way to do this. Of course, like, you know, the darker colors that you might want are going to kind of hide the pattern. So that's not the best. The other thing you can do is you can play with what's called blending modes. So over here on the left next to opacity are blending modes. There's a bunch of these, and I don't always understand all the technical stuff behind them, but they're easy to just kind of cycle through. So here's like darken, here's multiply. I think you would use this for like darker colors. Color burn, linear burn, darker color. Let's see, all of the ones in this area all have to do with lighting. So lighting, here's overlay, soft, hard light, vivid. There's a bunch of options. For darker colors, I think multiply would be best. So here's an example of how to make this white paper orange. I just literally paint orange and then change the blending mode to multiply. So if you wanted to now grab your brush and change it to blue, you could do that. Grab blue, click OK. It's already on multiply, so all I got to do is paint, and it will automatically apply with the pattern. So this is what I'm talking about. You can have one paper, and you can make a lot of different shades of paper from it. So that's that. Does that cover most of everything I wanted to talk about? Not quite. Some paper like this one, you'll see it has like dark corners. So dark corners, there's almost like, oh gosh, what do they call that? It's this thing that you see with like camera lenses. I can't think of the name of it right now. but different papers will have like darker corners and like the center will be bright. So if I wanted to like crop this and make, let's go to width height resolution, I want a 5" by 7" by 300 pixels per inch paper. Just going to click enter. Command 0 to fit to screen. Let's say I wanted the corners to be dark. I just cropped this, so if there was dark corners, now there are none. How would I make dark corners? So I'm going to choose my circular marquee. I'm going to start in the middle of this picture, and I'm going to start dragging. Again, if you hold Option when you drag, it'll drag from the center. It's kind of hard to see on this background. I'm going to drag until I mostly get everything but the corners. I think that's reasonable. Oh, shoot. Let me try that again. Okay, like that. Okay, so here I have a selection. It's kind of hard to see. I'm going to hit Q. If you hit Q when you make a selection, it turns everything that's selected regular, but everything that's not selected red. That's an easy way to just kind of see what you're doing. And I can use the, can I use the arrow keys? Maybe not. I have to go back to Q, go back to the selection, and then I can move it over and then hit Q again. So here you can see everything but the corners is selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Q to go back to the selection. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-I. That's to inverse the selection. You can also do it by going Select Inverse. Now if I hit Q, you can see now the corners are selected and everything else is not. I'm now going to go to Select, Modify Selection, and I'm going to feather it, and I'm going to choose a really big number. I don't even know what the biggest number is. Let's just do 500. And now if I hit Q again, you can see what it did. The corners are selected, but it feathered it all the way to the center. And then if you I'm going to back this up so I can show you. If I modify it and I don't pick a very big number, let's say I only did 50, and then I hit Q, you can see it selects the corners, but then it only feathers over 50 pixels. So it's not a very soft transition. So I'm going to hit Q again, I'm going to hit Command Z, oh there we go. And I'm going to go back to the modify selection. I'm going to pick that large number again. Instead of 50, I'm going to do 500. You can hit Q if you want to see it. Looks pretty smooth. I'm going to hit my brush tool. I'm going to get black. And just like we did with shadows, I'm going to paint. And you can see, even though the corners are what's selected, because I feathered it so wide, now it is painting more broadly. And there's more of a gradient effect. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. Oh, I should have done that in its own layer so I can play with the opacity. Shoot, I'm sorry. I'm going to hit Command Z. Command Z. Make a new layer. And then paint. Thank goodness there's an undo button. Sometimes I wish there was undo buttons for life, right? But, you know, so is the nature of life. Command D. And if I hit now the opacity, I can, change the opacity to 0 and it's basically invisible. And you can kind of dial in whatever you want. You can kind of darken the corners a little more subtly. If you don't pick something as large as like 500, you can make the corners a little more different and not feathered. So that's what I wanted to show you about that. So that's an example of changing paper shades. Again, just looking for different textures is really what you need to do. This one looks like plaster. This one looks like smoke. This one's just little cubes. Kind of looks like some wallpaper. This one looks like concrete. This one looks like paint. This one is like watercolors. Looks like water paint. Looks like blue wallpaper. This is like crinkled paper. Here's one where you can see like this is a tan paper, but the corners are dark. You can probably like play with blending modes when you do that kind of technique to darken corners, or you can start with a dark paper, and instead of selecting the corners and then feathering it, you can select the middle and feather it. You do the exact same thing, you just don't inverse the selection, and then you would lighten instead of darken. So you would paint with white. So let me see if I can show you what I'm talking about. It's the same thing. I'm just gonna make a new layer, grab a color. Let's just pretend this is paper. Sorry if some of this is repetitive. I'm trying to do this without scripting it first. Okay, and I'm going to change that to multiply like we did before, and it kind of has some texture to it. You can probably pick a better blending mode. That doesn't matter. I'm just going to, let's see. I'm going to choose the marquee tool. I'm going to start in the center. I'm going to hit Option, do the exact same thing like we did before. Oh no, I let go before I... Hang on. I'm going to click Option and pull, so it'll pull from the center. There we go. While I'm still on the selection tool, I have the ability to move it around. And I can move it until it tells me it's centered. Or I can just use the arrow keys and kind of do it myself. That's fine. Select, modify, feather, let's do, oh, I don't know, 100 pixels. Okay. So now, instead of painting with black, I'm going to have a new layer and I'm going to paint with white. So I'm going to put white on top. I'm going to switch to my brush and I'm going to make it really large. And I'm going to paint with white. You can see it feathering only 100 pixels. Doesn't look like it changes all that much. I'm going to hit Command B to deselect. And then I'm going to change the opacity of this layer to 0. And then you can, bump it up just slightly. And this works the same way, right? It's just doing the opposite of what we did when we did black. You can paint with white and lower the opacity. Paint with black, lower the opacity, and you can change the way something looks, like a filter. So, anyway, I think that covers most of the techniques. So this one you can use the magic wand tool and select the white. From a selection you can add color, or you can literally, because this one has color, you can literally just change the color with the hue and saturation slider. Let's see, don't save. Same thing here. Let's say this was ugly and you didn't like it, you can change it to a black and white. You can add another adjustment. Here's a levels adjustment, and you can make the paper look different. You can make the darks darker and make the lights lighter. And you can basically make black and white. It's not very clean looking. You could drop the black point to make it more gray, You can bring the white point up to make it more gray. There's a lot of options. So anyway, it's all non-destructive. All the adjustments, when we say non-destructive, that means you're not changing the original. You're just layering something on top of it. Of course, you can do that ahead of time if you want. It's easier, I think, to do it in your project file because I feel like needs are so specific. So we are almost done, I think. That's just extra paint. And so is that. So that's the example. I'm going to stop there. I feel like there's a million ways you can, modify colors. And if you just really look for patterns, textures, the color I think is secondary. So you can always tweak color. So, okay, until next time.